to describe the illness of the mind, and it's insanity. Now, when I read Insanity in the Big Book for 12 years, I thought, oh yeah, the crazy things that I did when I was drinking and using. Not true. Insanity is consistently referred to as the illness of the mind, and insanity is an unwhole mind. It's like we have a normal mind, but when it comes to our relationship with drugs and alcohol, the wisdom is not there. We can run companies, run families, do wonderful and excellent things, but we have an unwholeness in our mind when it comes to our relationship with drugs and alcohol. That's what catches up to us. 6 months after our last use, 9 months, a year. I was once sober for 3 months, not going to meetings, just had a horrible drunk and said, man, I'm never going to do that again. Life got good. I was happier. I woke up in the morning. I knew how much money I had in my wallet or how much money I didn't have. And I felt better. My language cleaned up a little bit. Little things had greater meaning for me. Life got so good, I said to myself one day, you know, life is really great not drinking. I think I'll celebrate. Now, there's a pure insanity. Celebrating how good life was not drinking by having a couple of beers with friends. I acted on that lie that I could have a couple of beers with friends to celebrate how good my life had gotten by not drinking, and I ran into the truth that I can't use. This can't use, can't quit is the verdict of inevitable annihilation. Feel this in your gut. Know that this is the reason that you're here. If you don't understand it, talk with your peers about it. Think of the examples of when you've used more than you planned on using. Think of the examples of when you used despite all of the consequences that would come tumbling down on top of you. Know that you qualify for this program because of these two simple membership characteristics. Tom McGuane, in a novel entitled Panama, had a character, a retired rock star, burnt-out rock star living in Key West. He was up all night using drugs with his wife or girlfriend, I can't remember, and the sun started to come up, and milk was being delivered, and this thought came to him, and it's all about this. The thought was, I was beginning to sense that the night had written a check that daylight couldn't cash. Our problem of addiction has written a check that our lives can't cash. Therefore, they're unmanageable. This is powerlessness. Narcotics Anonymous. We have different fellowships because the feeling of having shared in a common peril is one of the critical elements. And I don't relate to my wife at the level of our war stories, her being a heroin addict and my being mostly an alcoholic. So we have to have 12-step organizations that can really relate to the people at the level of the suffering and the struggling. But the consistency exists in the 12-step program, which is the other part of the solution. Fellowship supports and the program of action. Here's what the basic text Narcotics Anonymous talks about when it talks about the problem. The physical aspect of our disease is the compulsive use of drugs, the inability to stop once we've started. Illness of the body. The mental aspect of our disease is the obsession or overpowering desire to use even when we are destroying our lives. With perfect consistency, other 12-step organizations use this information because it's the truth about our problem and about our struggle. So I want to talk a little bit more about the illness of the mind and then talk about the solution that is defined by the problem that we described this morning. Dr. Silkworth observed in Towns Hospital that when his patients were detoxified but had yet to have an entire psychic change, which is what he called recovery, an entire psychic change, he observed them as being restless, irritable, and discontented. Now, just out of curiosity, has anyone in here had a moment or two of feeling restless, irritable, and discontented since they quit using? Usually there'll be somebody pointing at somebody, too, who's too restless, irritable, and discontented to raise their hand. But this is very common because typically chemically dependent people don't know how to live very well. Before I started drinking, I was spiritually sick. I was immature, irresponsible. I had all sorts of issues. So this whole idea is that we feel like this normally, but we know that if we use, and again, Silkworth uses these powerful phrases, once we use, we will get almost immediately a sense of ease and comfort. This is what our minds learn every time we use. A solution to misery. Or how to feel incredibly euphoric. And that's what our minds remember, short-term learning. Our minds associate, our lizard brains, our old brains learn in the short term by avoiding pain, drugs do that, and by seeking pleasure, drugs do that. Every human brain is a liability, is at risk for addiction because of how it's set up to learn. First time I used, I was 14 years old, living in Great Falls, Montana. I remember the sunset that night. I remember how the air smelled. There were forest fires in the Rockies. But more than anything else, I remember after my third beer saying, why hasn't somebody told me I could feel like this before? Unbelievable how alcohol made me feel. And I know many of you, and I don't want to trigger any associative kinds of highs, but many of you remember probably very clearly your first use. How many of you remember your first use of what turned out to be your drug of choice? Like, man, I have arrived. You know, Jung talks about the human soul having a yearning for wholeness. And I found a chemical wholeness in alcohol. I found a feeling of completeness. I was no longer shy. I did all the things that I was, embarrassed or afraid to do otherwise. So that's what our minds learn. Now remember the shellfish allergy person this morning who almost died because they ate shellfish? Do you think you'd ever hear that person say, boy, I bet it was that shellfish I ate, that was that shrimp I ate, bet I could have crawfish? Or their spouse may have suggested, I bet it was the people you had shellfish dinner with. If you just get a different dinner crowd, then everything will be okay. What are those two examples of, the illness of the body or the mind? Mind. It would be the person with the shellfish allergy unable to see the truth about their relationship with shellfish. But guess what? You don't hear them say that. Why not? What did their mind learn? Avoid pain. What won out? Pain or pleasure in that incident when they almost died? Pain. The pain of almost dying is what the mind learned. How much pleasure do you get from good scampi? Maybe this much if it's really good scampi. But that's what the mind remembered. So our minds remembered the positive thing because that was always what we felt. Even in the worst of our using, you still got that immediate kick, that euphoria. That's what our minds learn. Here's a challenging phrase, but I think it's absolutely true. Addiction is remembered success. What's the success? How to feel better. Euphoria. But then that solution to feeling better becomes a primary problem as addiction asserts itself in our lives. So the illness of the mind is kind of a learned phenomena that we don't relearn once it no longer is the solution that it once was. With me on that point? Okay. Well, I said earlier that the problem defines the solution. Let's plug the problem that we've defined by can't use, can't quit into that equation. Can't use, can't quit. On page 45 in the big book it says, lack of power, that was our dilemma. Can't use, can't quit is the same thing as lack of power, is the same thing as powerlessness in step one. Narcotics Anonymous says we admitted we were powerless over our addiction, that our lives become unmanageable. AA says we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, etc. Lack of power, that was our problem. If your problem is a lack of power, and the problem defines a solution, what one-word solution is defined by that problem? Power. It's that simple. Step 1 is a statement of the problem. Lack of power. Step 2 is a statement of the solution. Power working in the mind. Look at the words in step 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves, it's got to be greater than ourselves because this was our best effort, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. If insanity is an unwhole mind, a mind that can't see the truth about our relationship with drugs and alcohol, then sanity is a whole mind, a mind that can see the truth. Step 2 is a simple statement of the solution. With me? Now, there's a lot of words in the steps, and again, remember I talk about wall steps? Some of these words trigger things within each of us that keep us from seeing the truth if we're just reading the words in the steps. And step 2 has a lot of those pitfalls. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves. Are we talking about God here? Could restore us to sanity. I'm not crazy, I just have a drinking problem. So outside of the context of these principles, that can be confusing. And it gets even worse when we get to step 3. So let's just look at step 3 in terms of step 1 being a statement of the problem and step 2 being a statement of the solution. Step 3 is simply a decision about whether we're going to live in the problem or the solution. That's a simple step 3 to mull over right now. The words in step 3, and I'm not suggesting we change those words, but the words in step 3 made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Well, with gender sensitivity, you're going to be concerned about that statement. With issues with God, you're going to be concerned about that statement. So let's just look at the underlying principle. Step 3 is a decision about whether we're going to live in the problem or the solution. Simple. What do you need to make good decisions? Good information. What haven't we had in the past? Good information about our addiction. We can now make a good decision in step 3 because we've been given the truth about the problem and the truth about the solution. So step 3 is a decision